Chapter 1. The monk entered the dark halls of the monastery tired and weary from his previous mission. It had taken him outside the vine-covered walls of the secluded monks and into the cold, desolate town of DeWitt, Colorado. There he had battled the evil and corruption that had rooted itself into the very fabric of the town. Limping down the halls that led to his warm, comfortable bed, the monk reflected on that tiny, insignificant town. He had left a year ago to infiltrate it and study whether or not an ancient evil was attempting to gain access to the numerous human souls that lay on the surface world. It had been decades since any sign of the Soul Eaters, but the brotherhood that protected the human race from them were not hesitant to investigate when one did surface. Opening the door to his room, the monk wasn't surprised to find everything just as he had left it. Setting his pack on a rocking chair in the corner of the room, he shook off the trench coat that had protected him from the winter cold that had been a side effect of the emergence of an ancient seductress known as Lilith. The katana he wielded in the final conflagration was once again placed on the wall. Its shorter twin welcomed back its sibling. The belt that held two leather gun holsters was taken off and hung upon the rocking chair. The guns were as tired as the monk that wielded them, and both needed to be cleaned and oiled, but not at the time. The monk sighed as he sat on the long-desired bed. Blood-soaked clothes were thrown into a hamper in the far corner of the room. Even though he didn't want to, he stood warily, limped to the plain dresser made of oak, and changed into his standard brown robes. 3 heavy knocks on his door froze the monk in his footsteps. Sighing, he made the visitor wait until he was sitting on the familiar bed. "Come in." The only thing the monk wanted to do was lie back on his bed and let his mind drift away into oblivion as sleep claimed him. Instead, he watched as another brother entered the room. "Brother Timothy, I'm glad you returned from your adventuring from the south. Did everything go as planned?" The monk winced as pain laced through his left leg, a reminder of the last battle. The injured monk offered his brother the seat in front of his desk. "To what do I owe the honor of your presence at such a late hour, Brother Stephen?" Sitting down, Stephen smiled at the injured monk. It was a smile that Brother Timothy had seen many times. He regretted each of those times. "Can't a man visit another man that he hasn't seen in over a year?" As Timothy gently massaged his wounded leg, a laugh slipped out of his mouth that embodied equal parts humor and pain. "It has always been my experience the answer to be no. What do you want, Stephen?" "I want to go to sleep, and the last time someone denied me that, I lopped off their head." Stephen grinned and stood. "The council wishes to congratulate you on your victory against the ancient evil. They also would like to debrief you on the situation." "They can have my report in the morning concerning Lilith after I've eaten breakfast. Good night, Stephen." The monk walked to the door, opened it, and then turned around. "You've heard me wrong, Timothy. They don't want to debrief you on what has occurred, but what might occur. Apparently, there are signs that Velius might be summoned. They want you to investigate." The pain in his leg suddenly traveled to his head as Timothy wished he hadn't survived his last battle. At least then he could sleep. Why does the council want me to investigate?" "Because you are the only one qualified enough to do such a thing and live to tell about it." "Where will I be heading this time?" Stephen displayed that grin that Timothy knew he would be most certainly regret. "Indianapolis, Indiana." With that, Stephen turned, switched off the bedroom light, leaving Timothy in a complete darkness. As the monk sprawled out on the comforting hardness of his bed, he uttered only 2 words before falling into sweet oblivion. Why Indiana? 2. A classroom full of teenage boys and girls watched the clock as it tortured them with the eternal long ticks of the second hand as it eked towards 3 o'clock. Their teacher, a man standing tall at 26 years of age, grinned at their need for freedom as he wrote their assignment on the white dry erase board. New to teaching, Roland was sad when he entered his classroom to find the black chalkboards usually covered in a film of dusty white, had been replaced with the sterility of the dry erase boards. This school year was the first of his professional teaching career. After 5 years of college, 1 year of student teaching, a bachelor's in education, and over $30,000 in student loans, Roland was out of college and loving most of it. As the bell shrilly rang throughout the building, teenagers rushed out of the classroom as if the 3 o'clock bell was a fire alarm instead. Summoning up not-so-distant memories, similar to the events occurring now, Roland didn't try to admonish them. He was packing his briefcase, an old leather gift from a long-lost love, when an older man dressed in a tweed jacket and a bow tie walked into his classroom. "Well, young man, how are you catching on with the profession of teaching eager young minds?" Roland could detect heavy sarcasm in his elderly voice. "I doubt most of them aren't as eager as they were back when I was a kid." The older man smiled and sat down at a desk in the first row. "They never are eager at that age. When I was their age, it was all about the war, playing kick the can, and chasing girls. At your age, I can bet it was all about loud music, hair bands, and chasing girls. Kids these days only care about cell phones, video games, and that damnable Facebook. It's also acceptable to be chasing both boys and girls." The old man shook his head in disgust, allowing Roland to sneak in a held-back bout of laughter. "What are you and the missus planning for the weekend? We could discuss your career here at South Bend High, and I know the wife could use another view on the latest gossip." Roland sat down and absently placed his right hand on his wedding ring. Painful memories started to sprout up throughout his mind, piercing into his thoughts like thorns from a rose. He glanced up at the elderly teacher, then away towards the outside window. "My wife isn't well. She hasn't been in some time." He could see the regret shown in the elder teacher's face. It looked as if he had burped in public. "Is it that nasty stomach virus everyone and their brother has been getting? My missus had a terrible time with it a couple weeks back." "No. She had a complete mental breakdown a year ago. It was so bad that she was placed into a facility just outside of town. That was one of the major reasons I moved into town, so I could be closer to her." In an attempt to change the subject, the older man asked what town he was originally from, to which Roland responded, "Indianapolis." 3. In her dreams, Ashley stood in the center of a giant arena littered with dead bodies. She turned in a full circle to catch every detail. Normally, her dreams were about getting to the prom or high school. Her dreams never included football fields that were soaked with so much blood that the grass were tinted a reddish-green color. She was standing on a scaffold that was about 20 feet tall by her guesstimation. Ashley turned in reaction to the sound of someone standing on a metal bleacher. The normally unnoticeable metallic twang sounded more like an explosive gunshot. Standing in the northernmost arena of the stand stood a single figure. Smoke rose from the 2 guns that the figure held. Ashley looked from the thin wisps of smoke to the figure's face, meeting the sharp blue eyes that seemed to pierce into her very soul. A vicious, gurgling roar filled the arena suddenly. Ashley turned to see a pair of crimson eyes peering from the announcer's box. She woke up screaming. 4. The sun rose quietly over the town of South Bend, Indiana, as Roland finished his first pot of coffee. Filling the pot for a second time with water, Roland went over the crazy events he had read on the internet and watched on the local news. None of the big news stations had picked up what was happening in Indiana yet, but Roland thought that they would in time. The headline he currently watched crawl across the screen was of the mysterious group of rioters coming from the capital, Indianapolis. There were also some headlines of a telling of a plague or terrorist attack in downtown Indy. Roland was startled to see that the governor of Indiana had come onto the air and announced that the federal government was placing the state of Indiana into quarantine. All residents and visitors of the state were not going to be allowed out until whatever it is that is happening is quelled. The governor himself admitted to not knowing for sure what was wrong, But whatever it was, the government did not want it spreading. Roland had made that first pot of coffee after a telephone call from his brother at 2 in the morning. His brother roughly said, "Roland, I'm sorry about the past, but hell is full, brother. The dead walk the earth. Meet me at the mall in Rochester. I'll be waiting. Safe travels." His brother had spoken quickly, and even groggy, Roland understood the message. He climbed out of bed and started that first pot of coffee. It was breakfast blend from Seattle's Best. Roland liked it the most because of the strength. He usually needed a strong cup of coffee in the morning to get him going. He poured some cream and sugar into the coffee, sat down in front of the television, and turned on the news. Usually the local news isn't on for another 3 hours, but there they were, reporting about the current events. As the coffee ran down his throat, a horrid feeling crawled up his stomach. As he waited for the second pot of coffee to brew, Roland packed the necessary items: food, water, a revolver, his father's World War II military-issued M1 Garand, and ammunition. Arranging the other items in his backpack, he stowed the revolver in a hidden compartment. Roland needed to be arrested for a concealed weapon when all hell was breaking loose, like he needed a hole in the head. The last thing Roland did was strap on his waterproof steel-toed boots and grab his hunting hat. The hat reminded him of the character Robert Muldoon, the gamekeeper in Jurassic Park, his favorite novel. Roland favored the version in the movie better than the books. The one in the book survived, but was drunk most of the time. In the movie, Muldoon died while tracking his prey, teaching Roland a valuable lesson: never underestimate your enemy. They might turn around and hunt you instead. The hat served to remind him of that. Stepping out of his house, he breathed a sigh of relief. So far, so good, he thought, as he took the first steps into the most dangerous hunting grounds he would ever traverse. He thought back to his first hunting trip with his father and brother. They were hunting in Maine during the deer season. His father loved to hunt, and therefore shared his pastime with his sons. Roland was the elder son, and his brother was younger by only a couple of years. Their mother, who hated hunting, had forbidden him to take the boys hunting until they were 16 years of age. Roland's father had served in the military during World War II, and had started hunting since he was 9. On many of these hunting trips with his sons, he would tell those stories about his adventures in Germany, and about the fight against the Nazis. It was on one of these trips that he told them about zombies, and the Nazis' connection with them. His father was drunk as usual when he told the two of them about the time his company invaded a concentration camp. It was there that he had discovered that the Nazis were using Jewish prisoners as test subjects for the zombie virus they were creating. Roland opened up his garage and pulled the tarp off of the dirt bike he rarely used. He had bought it when his wife was still around, thinking how it might spice up the relationship. Roland struggled to hitch a small buggy, served as a trunk, onto the back of the bike. In the buggy, he stored a full canister of fuel and his backpack. His father's rifle was stored in a holster that Roland had jury-rigged into the bike some time ago. Kicking the bike into gear, Roland didn't bother to shut the garage door behind him. He probably will never come back, so what's the use? Roland headed south as the sun was beginning to come up. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his mirrored glasses. It was going to be a long trip. 5. It was still dark in the capital when the man looked out into the city. He had just finished the last preparations that his master had bidden him to accomplish. He took off his flat-brimmed hat and set it on the table. Next, he gathered his loose hair behind his head and tied it into a ponytail. His hand left his hair and traveled to his neck, where he plucked the sign of priesthood from his shirt and flung it into the trash can next to him. He didn't deserve to wear it any longer. That was Chapter 1 of the Book of Roland, coming out on February 25th, published by Burning Willow Press. Make sure to grab your copy.